So just really quickly, I'd like to introduce our two esteemed guest speakers. If I get any of this wrong, feel free to correct me. So first is Dr. Parag Havaldar, an Academy Award-winning computer scientist experienced in software technology for a variety of digital entertainment initiatives that involve 3D computer graphics, computer vision and imaging, machine learning, media compression, streaming, and distribution. He has held various industry positions, leading engineering teams to pioneer visual effects, animation technologies for companies such as SONY Pictures and Activision Blizzard. These technologies proved pivotal in the creation of digital characters in many movies, such as the Amazing Spiderman series, Beowulf, Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, Zack Snyder's Watchmen, and many more. In 2017, the Academy of Motion Pictures presented him with a Technical Achievement Award for pioneering work in expression-based facial performance capture technology, which enabled the creation and animation of realistic digital characters at large scale for the motion picture industry. And currently, Parag is a technical leadership at Blizzard Entertainment, advancing cinematic technology efforts in game franchises such as World of Warcraft, Overwatch, StarCraft, Diablo, and Hearthstone, and also serves as an adjunct faculty professor in the computer science at the Viterbi School. And we also have Dr. Setrag Khoshafian, one of the industry's pioneers and recognized experts in digital enterprises, especially digital transformation through intelligent BPM automation, AI, IoT, blockchain, and CRM. He has been a senior executive in the software industry for the past 25 years, where he has invented, architected, and steered the production of several enterprise software products and solutions. So currently he is Pega's chief evangelist and strategic IoT, blockchain, and intelligent automation technology thought leader involved in numerous technologies, thought leadership, marketing, alliance, and customer initiatives. He has given a TEDx talk on cultural trends and is published in Forbes and Digital Transformation Debt, as well as RT Insights as part of their Brain Trust. Cool, so give it up for our guest speakers. I'm gonna begin the panel with a few questions that were actually prepared by Katie Swinton, but I am here to moderate. Cool, so our first topic of discussion is technology and creativity. So some people, the question is, some people perceive data and creativity as polar opposites. They see data-driven insights as not necessarily being creative. But I know that both of you see technology as a part of creativity. So I was hoping you could expand a bit on that topic and whether or not you see those forces as working together or pulling apart from each other.
Good. Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting when we look at the data and we're seeing, of course, an explosion of data. There is a term which is quite popular in this whole milieu of artificial intelligence, and that is data mining. And the idea of data mining is finding those patterns and nuggets in the data, and then leveraging that for creativity. In fact, the term I like to use is innovation. The two go hand in hand. Would you agree, Parag? That creativity, although in the media and entertainment has very powerful connotations, but in our milieu, in enterprises, we usually use the term innovation. And technology is almost the fertile ground, and data mining is one of them. There are many others. For innovation, for creativity, for coming up with new ideas, new services, as well as creativity in how we conduct businesses and how we transform ourselves.
So let me add a very media-centric perspective to this, since I work with a lot of creative people. One example I'd like to give about creativity is, in the last century, if you saw the beginning of motion pictures, the invention of the motion picture camera, which was done in the probably 1910s, let's say. The way it was really creative for that point of time, the way it was used, but the way it was used was people just plopped it in front of a theater happening, and they projected that in a movie theater, and across different places and time. One actor who made very good use of it was Charlie Chaplin, and that's the reason why we know him today. But it took another 100 years of cinematic development and creativity to see how this instrument, the camera has not changed fundamentally, but the way we experience movies and stories, that has been so much different, right? The editing process, the visual effects, and throughout the history of this development, creative people were driving technologies, and technologies were towards driving the creative people. But in that loop, as you said, a lot of data, there was an iterative process going on. And iterations generate a lot of data that can be looked in. So normally when you tell a story, a movie, you have different takes, you have different iterations that people, directors go look at again and again and improve upon them, because it's not exactly, in a sense, not mining data, but it's still looking at the data and figuring out what works better. So I think a lot of data is going to ultimately lead to a lot of creative processes and thinking happening afterwards. And coming to the more modern part, where computation has become a forebearer in many ways, and talking about machine learning in particular, on the creative side, we can see now how these processes can create imagery by themselves, which was never happening before. And this is creating some new ground. So it's all because of lots and lots of data. So I perceive the fact that data is very helpful.
So continuing on that thought process, the intersection of technology and creativity, technology can have positive and negative effects on the creative side of entertainment. I was hoping you could speak to some insights you've gained working with creative and technical people in the entertainment industry. Yeah, Parag.
Sure. So when you work with creative people, they desire limitless freedom to create stuff, right? But the practicality of the whole situation is funds are limited, times are limited. So technology definitely has to be an enabler to allow the creative people to really implement their vision. But it shouldn't hold someone back. But it's also been, can also play a good role in advancing discipline to the process. For instance, I'm sure when James Cameron thought about Avatar back in the 1990s, he waited for 10 years to make it. And that was because technology then wasn't ready, right? After some of the characters like on Lord of the Rings, Gollum, the first digital character came about. We were in fact working on technologies to how we could do this at scale. Facial expressions, instead of having lots and lots of money required to be devoted to creating those things. And so when technology became an enabler in this case, it helped, right? But oftentimes, because of the limitations of technology and the promises that vision makes, you overshoot budgets, you overshoot. And I think in that sense, technology can really play a part in putting some discipline around the creative process, which is conflicting.
So moving on to how technology and accessibility interact. I know earlier you spoke with Katie how there are rising trends in making technology usable for a wider audience, such as implementing technology for consumers that has no code or low code requirements. And you had some different opinions on how this option is going forward. So Setrag, if you could start us off on speaking on some of the positive attributes of the no code or the low code method.
Sure, and that is a very important point. So I've had the privilege of also being an adjunct faculty for about 20 years. I've taught many computer science courses. And if we look at evolution of programming languages in computer science, right? How many of you here have heard the term assembly language? So, okay, I'm impressed.
How many of you have heard of punch cards?
My first course was in Fortran, yeah, and you wait the next day. Yeah. And so we've seen an evolution from assembly language, which itself, this is in the 50s, by the way, was an advancement over machine language, zeros and ones, right? And then the next wave in programming was high-level structured programming languages. And now there were languages like PL1, C, which is still in the top 10 programming languages, believe it or not, yeah. Especially in embedded systems, Pascal, others. And so the productivity of the developers, the programmers, increased. The next wave was object-oriented programming. It started with one of my favorite languages, Smalltalk. You don't hear about it today. But then you had the emergence of C++, and then C#, now that Microsoft is espousing, Java, of course, and many others, even JavaScript, etc. So if there have been objective studies on the productivity of the programmer when you went from assembly language to high-level structured programming languages to object-oriented languages. We have not had a lot of progress in this area of programming until low-code and no-code arrived. And what did they do? Now, to put things in perspective, there are more than 10 million Java developers in the world. There is an equivalent number of developers in C++, C#, JavaScript, etc. I'm not surprised how many of you have heard of low-code, no-code before? I'm impressed. There are, if you go to a university, there are no courses being offered. Part of the problem is that every company does it differently. And, to compare, there are maybe 100,000 low-code, no-code developers. What does it do? It empowers the citizen developer. Who is the citizen? Every one of you, or business owners, are citizen developers. Empowers them to build applications without programming. I will sometimes do comparison. I keep sharp, right? I go to the development environment and see how you develop new applications, what are the tools, and so on. It hasn't changed that much since the 70s. There are progresses. These maybe some of the disagreements we have. There is progress, but it hasn't changed that much until low-code, no-code, where the productivity is completely different. Just as business owners can use PowerPoint, Word, etc. for their presentations, for their communication, now they are able to build applications. And so the empowerment, as well as the common language between the business and the technologies, now has a basis through low-code and no-code.
Interesting. So for those of us who are less familiar with no-code and low-code, do you think you could provide maybe some examples of how they're being used today?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you have a student who is applying to the university and you're going through a process. And you know what you need to do. There is the application, and then there is an approval, maybe there is a financial after they got approved, and then all the paperwork you need to send. So what you see is a value stream or a value chain. It has a beginning and end. Low-code, no-code takes exactly what I described and models it. It's really very much a model-driven development. You don't need, just as you would do it in PowerPoint, you put this shape and that shape and that shape, and say there is a sequence and there are things you need to do. So the environment of no code is doing exactly what the business is trying to achieve. That student is applying, here's the application, this is the form you design without, I mean, if you look, I advise everybody to experiment with programming. Look what you have to do. Get an IDE, write the code. There is a syntax directed editor, there's a tool here and there. But here you completely ignore those, and exactly as you would do in a PowerPoint, here are the shapes, and you would design it. You would design the entire process and tell the system, okay, go now and execute.
Cool.
I can add a little bit.
Yeah.
Please.
It is true that much has not changed. Although I can tell you that in the beginning there were examples where you think of an algorithm, right? You draw a flowchart. And there were initial beginnings of taking a flowchart and translating that directly into a program, right? So much in that same way, the more formal you make a problem, the more well-defined you can formalize it, it becomes easier to translate into machine code. So the example that you gave, if you can take that or any other problem and put it in an environment where it can be made more formalized, then translating that formal picture into the code, into an executable application, that can be possible. I don't think I disagree there. But the point I want to make is all these things are still the same, because whether you are yourself writing a set of instructions that you need to execute, debug, change, it's still like, you're doing, whether it's the imperative form or the object-oriented form, or the functional form, functional languages, right? It's still code being run. Whether you're doing less work and defining it well, still you're defining something in a context that can then be translated. The higher level you go, the easier it gets. You get a more citizen-like approach where you do less work. However, recent trends have changed slightly. All these things are, you write a program, you execute it, or you define some set of instructions and you execute it. The new paradigm with deep learning especially is, I provide a network and I show you lots and lots and lots and lots of examples. And the system is going to train itself and figure out what that program should be. And that's a fundamental shift in the way computation is evolving and changing. Because now it's not more about how do you program, it's more about how can I get my data set, lots and lots of data very efficiently. And so by that token, if you see, people are going to be champions, or who have become champions of machine learning and deep learning, are the people who are not those people who have the best minds in programming. The people who have got the best data, like Google or Facebook.
So do you think deep learning will have a similar effect on accessibility to leveraging technology, kind of similar to the low code?
I think so, because right now you can, if you have enough of a background, you can take literally 10 lines of code, or even if you block it up with what Setrag is saying, and you can get lots of data and it just works. It's not too hard to do. The hardest thing is trying to get the appropriate amount of data.
Yeah.
In fact, that's very interesting. I'd like to add on it a little bit. We mentioned earlier the citizen developer. There is an area that is coming, still relatively immature, but I'm really glad Parag touched upon it, and that is the citizen data scientist. So when you turn AI on itself, that is, AI helps write AI, right? Then you have an environment which automates a lot of what you need to do manually, right? I speak with a lot of data scientists. I've visited some of the most brilliant people, PhDs in statistics, You know, I don't know if this is your experience, Parag, but sometimes 80% of their time they spend cleaning the data. And they have only 20% of the time doing analysis. Because data has many sources, has a lot of errors in it. They have to prepare the data, and then they run their logistic regression, whatever, the neural network, etc. So that is a big challenge. But now what we're seeing is citizen data scientists, where the tools are becoming mature enough that all they need to do is say, this is my requirement, these are the types of results I would get, go system and find out what are the best algorithms that I can apply.
Yeah, and to lead on to that, when you collect data organically, it's going to have a lot of noise. It's going to have a lot of bias also in there. And all that, if you're not careful, is going to make it into your model.
Yeah.
And then you have a flawed setup.
Yeah. Garbage in, garbage out, right?
So, yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of understanding of what you want to know exactly what data how to collect data, or if you have the data, what to extract and condition it properly, you know, between etc.
Cool. So moving on to organizational behavior and how technology influences that as well. I know you have both spoken in the past about the silo problem and how technology can help alleviate that in organizations. Could you both speak to ways you've seen technology alleviate or complicate the silo issue within large organizations?
Okay. So this is very interesting when you come to organization, because I've spent quite a bit of time analyzing it. And there are some very interesting trends, but if you look at how companies organize themselves, how many of you have heard of the org chart, right? I bet you this university has one, right? and when organizations grow, guess what happens? They add more layers and the pyramid increases. And the org chart has stayed with us for hundreds of years. It's very old. Just as we've seen very advanced challenges and opportunities in technology, we're starting to see some challenges and opportunities for the org chart. What is the problem of the org chart? Because the higher levels are not aware of what's going on in the lower levels, and plus the budgeting and the measurable business objectives are given in silos. We're almost encouraging people to stay in their silos. Whereas if you look what is an organization and what is a business, it's a collection of value streams that go across organizational boundaries. Sometimes they go outside the enterprise itself. So we're saying your business is a collection of value streams. Think of like onboarding an employee, right? You have to do orientation, which is done by HR. You have to get their credentials, which is done by IT. If it's an procurement employee, you have to open an account, which is done by finance. Each one of these groups can do its job, but really, if you want to get that job done, the end-to-end onboarding, you have to have orchestration and collaboration within these siloed organizations. So what is happening now is organizations are realizing they need to digitize and automate these value streams. And they need to empower people to own these processes that go across organizational boundaries. Having said that, still the challenge of the org chart is humongous. There aren't many models which are successful models of flatter organizations or decentralized organizations. I don't know, Parag, do you see that?
I don't have much experience in organizational dynamics in that part, but having worked at startup companies, having seen them grow to a big company, having worked at big companies, I can, especially in the creative side, I can definitely point out a few things. One is, as an organization grows, the most effective thing to be done is communication. You have to communicate, as you mentioned, across different different departments. But communication, there has to be ways of communicating the status of what the current project is with respect to your different domains. One thing that we do in our industry is try to move people. Like you might be an engineer, and you might be in the creative side, but you don't have to necessarily set up two different things. If you put a few engineers in the middle of the creative people and take a few creative people put in the middle of the engineers, they start to speak a common language, and that has to empower the whole setup. And by definition, by drawing an org chart, or by drawing, you need an org chart because you need to know whom to report to and what the goals are. But by defining departments, by definition, you've already siloed the thing. If you don't encourage communication across the different departments in some way or the other, then it is going to go into its own beast, which is going to be harder to tame afterwards.
Absolutely.
So another topic I know you guys have discussed is how quickly technology is maturing and how technology recently has been maturing more quickly than the human willingness or ability to use it to its full potential. What shifts do you think need to occur in organizational behavior in order to effectively adopt technological shifts as they happen?
I have multiple thoughts on this. Yes, I mean, technology has changed in a very big way. Right? If you see how, let me take an example. Many years ago, when tools of communications were limited, there used to be a phone call or a face-to-face meeting, then there was email, then there was instant messaging and messaging around it. This only improved communication. And you take that in a more visual medium, there are all these technologies like, virtual reality. And these things are coming up in big ways, although they haven't really been, there's not yet used a full potential to have applications that people can adapt to. But if you, to do your work successfully, you need to be able to work on your project, you need to be able to communicate with people that you want, or collaborate with people, and you want to do that irrespective of physical space. And anything that is going to make you go in that direction is definitely going to make your whole very successful. But I especially find this in the more younger generation. Right? They are so. I mean, we thought we were very good when we grew up in terms of doing so many things, and you see the kids coming out these days after college. They have done all that we've done, and they're super good at the same time, Instagram and they do everything. And just the fact that you can have 10 different things going on means that you have a very good agile mind. You just need to have the right guidance in place to harness those young minds.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, if I were to add something to that, what we're seeing it in the way organizations are dealing with their customers. And for obvious reasons, I mean, you want to optimize the customer experience, otherwise they'll leave you, right? There is dollars and cents. And one of the ways they're doing that is the contextual treatment of customers, that is, treating different customers differently. And for millennials, this is very important. You need to be responsive, right? I know somebody who wrote a book on that. And then you need to treat different customers differently, right? Everybody likes to be treated. Now, take the technology and apply it to the employees of the organization, right? Empower them, just as the customers would like. So treat your employees as customers, empower them using technology, and understand who they are, understand what is their context, and whatever you're providing in terms of the milieu and the type of work they're doing, treat them differently. This is happening now It's happening, and it's leveraging technology to do it. AI as well as process automation.
Do you have any examples of, I guess you just mentioned AI, process automation, how those or other similar technologies you think are going to, I guess, evolve organizational behavior? Like where do you think, when organizational behavioral techniques catch up to technology, and what areas do you expect that to happen?
Yeah, I mean, couple of them, it's interesting. A lot of technology is bottom up, right? It's bottom, like the cloud. I mean, it's servers, it's somebody else has your data center. That's what the cloud is, right? It's very bottom up. And if you look at all the stack of OSI, ISO, or the internet, it's all bottom up technology. But sometimes these bottom up technologies are having societal impacts. So let me give you one example, and it's blockchain, right? Blockchain is up and coming. Blockchain is not cryptocurrency, it's an enabling technology. But what it's encouraging is decentralized organization. There is something called decentralized organization enabled through distributed applications from blockchain. In a sense, it's allowing various people who maybe don't know each other to organize themselves in an organization, even in a company, have the bylaw in the blockchain. So that's one example of a technology. Another one is IoT, Internet of Things. One of the biggest trends we're seeing in Internet of Things is that the analysis is happening at the edges, right? Or for connected cars, connected cities, connected appliances, etc. Rather than, we spoke about the noise of the data. So this is a huge trend. That is having an organizational impact in the way we treat, various roles, for example, field service, as well as the overall ecosystem of our trading partners.
Cool, so we've touched on a few topics here. Now I'd like to open up questions to the audience. If you have anything to ask regarding creativity, accessibility, or really anything.
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing I wanted to better understand is when you're talking about technology empowering individuals, the technology drives a lot of it bottom up, and then the organizational behavior catches up, so to speak. It works that way a lot with how the technology affects people as well. What do you do if the technology isn't making people happy or causing them to have to be in patterns that don't feel satisfying? A good example is they found advertising. If you double it for a country, people are 3% less happy. Making more targeted ads doesn't really solve the issue, which is inherently at the bottom line, advertising makes us unhappy. So how do we square those two?
Well, I'll give it a shot, and I like to hear what Parag has to say also. I think you have to approach it top down. And I think and that is even though a lot of the influences of technologies like blockchain, IoT, even the internet has been bottom up, you have to approach it top down. So top down problems with, there are also strategic methodologies like, balanced scorecard or design thinking. There are a whole bunch of them that helps organizations think top down with measurable results. And then when you're approaching it top down, you say, what type of technologies do I need? So even though technology has had that impact, the bottom up, really an organization which is trying to transform themselves, majority of my time I spend on digital transformation, you have to approach it top down.
I'd like to say that the best technologies that really help out are those that we can see. If something is going to be, if there's a high footprint of technology, that's not good. It should be seamless. Now, whether you go about it in a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach or in some other way, that's up to the kinds of technology that you want to deploy. But for something to become part of your everyday life, part of your productive, professional setup, it has to be, the barrier to using it, entering it has to be less. Yes?
This question actually goes to you, Dr. Havaldar, because this actually actually goes to creativity and science, or AI. So I want to ask whether you think the black mirror actually will become reality. Specifically one episode, because you work in Blizzard. So they actually plug in this device onto players' head here, and they try to explore their memory and use their fears to create storylines. And I've been reading about it. It seems like that's totally the direction the game developers are going. So my question is, one, is that true? Two, if that's true, how do you define, like, do you work with scientists and make sure it doesn't go too far and to cause death? Who's making that, drawing that line, saying, hey, we're exploring consumer insights versus we're exploring too much?
Hard question. But a nice one.
You're fascinating.
So, I just wanted to touch upon a little bit of, or maybe something formal about AI. And we all have used, and media also use this AI and machine learning and deep learning in much of the same connotation. But my personal, and I'll come back to your question. My personal understanding of, or at least what I want to say is, machine learning does one of two things. It does the problem of solving clustering, just trying to figure out which is in what cluster, and it does interpolation. Okay, you have a lot of data. How do I interpolate between the data given a different signal coming in? It requires a formal model to see how you can regress with it. Deep learning also solves the same two problems, clustering and interpolation. But it just does that in a very, very, very smart way. Figures it out by itself. AI is something different. I don't think there are very many places in the world doing what you call AI. Deep learning is not AI. Deep learning is just one of those two things I told you about. Going back to your question about the episode that we talked about and how do you read fears from the mind. And, I would like to have a world in which we can read what is the, we're still struggling with context. We can't understand context well, right? Because it's still in our minds, you're doing something. If you can try to understand context, the response of any system, whether it's an entertainment, in this case, or it's a software that's acting, or a system that's acting to cater to you, that just becomes better and better. So, I think we're going to have technologies that will be able to read a lot more about the mind that you don't have right now. We're far away from that, but I think we can. In terms of the control and the risk and how do you make sure how you don't go too far. I think as professionals, as citizens, we have to be responsible. We have to make sure that we don't, that we are protected. We don't do something that is going to destroy us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so that technology is called deep learning, or what's it called? Like, how do you figure out what plot your story should go? If you want to.
No, it's not. Deep learning is a general concept, right? But if you can, it's storytelling has been very linear. You have a story and you just experience it. Games, on the other hand, are interactive. There's a reaction. You act, there's a reaction, and if you wanted to have a storytelling experience that changes by or it's self-creating story, right? That is going to be very fascinating. I don't think we are procedurally there yet, but I think maybe some deep learning techniques can help these things. So if you have a story and you have an experience, it's fear. You have a story, you have an experience, you're happy. So based on that, if you are in a happy state, you could see how to read a story into something different, right? Or if you are not in not a happy state and you wanted to get into a happy state, what do I do? What changes do I make to the story? And also trying to personalize it to you. That's important. Stories, if you can personalize content towards you, that will be a game changer. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to follow up a little bit because there was one question on what's possible with new technology in entertainment, and there are so many other options. Like we see experiments with VR, AR, relation-based mixed reality, etc., etc. What, in your opinion, going to be the next big thing in entertainment provoked by technology advancement?
So VR was always there, right? It's just come in, and then somehow it's got this connotation with putting on something. VR is virtual reality. You want to be in a virtual world, whether that's rendered on a screen in front of you, on a cinema in front of you, or on a screen, or in a head-mounted display. Right? What's very particular about it is that you go into this fascinating suspense. What do you call this? Suspended disbelief. Right? And if you can do that, then that's great. The next things that are coming out in virtual, I want to be in a world where you cannot make out the difference between virtual and real. And as far as visual effects in cinema go, yeah, we have achieved that. Right? But that's still a non-scalable process. It takes a lot of time, a lot of budget to do that. Once you learn to do that, or once you figure out how to do that more interactively, in real time, then applications which which can be done in a very, on spontaneously become possible, and that's going to be good.
If I were, it's not entertainment, but it deals with technology. One of the trends we're seeing, which is very, very interesting, related to AR, VR, is the notion of digital twin. And in industries such as oil and gas, but also in healthcare and many other industries, in manufacturing, the notion of digital twin and how close you get interacting with the actual device, connected device, through the digital twin, that's an incredibly powerful trend, and AR, VR techniques are being leveraged in that. Not entertainment, but here fixing and maintaining maybe remote devices, etc., or even remote patients. So the robustness of the digital twin, using AI technology, but also AR, VR technology, is an incredibly powerful trend.
I'll give you another nice idea. Today we can create digital avatars of ourselves. Expensive, but we can. We can create digital animations of yourself. Expensive, but very, very possible. We can create facial expressions such as you, such as yourself on that digital twin, digital doll that you have. Think of a world with all this machine learning techniques, or deep learning techniques, when you have access to lots and lots of not just data, but your personal data. Facebook, you've been recording everything on Instagram and everything. And now you can make that digital avatar act and behave like you on its own, based on your personal data. It's still not there, it will not there be for a long time, but this is going to be fantastic. But this is like, it's immortality, it's digital immortality. After you're long gone, your great-great-grandchildren will be able to speak to you, and they get a response as though it was you. And that's fantastic.
It's also a Black Mirror app.
We come back to
So I have a question more related to, I guess, organizational management and change management. So I know there's everything from, a large banking institution that takes forever to make change, to a startup that's lean, agile, etc. I recently got off a project, 5-year project that implemented nothing because of this the politics of things,
Yeah.
right? From integrating business and technology, also working in an industry potentially where there's people from different generations, so dealing with generational gaps, and also just empowering people to enjoy and embrace change. What is the best way, or what are some key skills that a future leader can develop to help with that?
That's a very good question, and it's a very difficult one. I will give you, from my experience, what I've seen work and not work. The way organizations are structured today, you have to get the buy-in in order to try. I'm going to tell you what are some of the things that have worked, but you need to get the buy-in from the executives, and they need to be willing to change and put the budgets. That's always the question I ask. Okay, you're willing to change, but where is the budget? Now, the mantra that I really like, and in fact I've done many workshops and seen organizations change, is to think big, to think revolutionary, but start small. And for you to think big and start small, you need a methodology of the backlog of changes you want to do. You cannot change everything. You need to prioritize and revisit. And there are methodologies that help you balance business value with ease of implementation. There are measurable methodologies that do this. So that balance, that methodology creates a backlog that you need to visit. That backlog needs a body that is empowered. That's why I mentioned the buy-in from the executives and the budget. A body which is called sometimes competency center, sometimes called center of excellence. We're here talking about transformational competency center. So the organization is serious and has empowered this body, which has representatives from different age groups through different departments, etc. That constantly, their raison d'etre, the reason they exist, is to monitor and execute this backlog and revisit it constantly. That's where you get an agile organization. You cannot boil the ocean from day one. It's very difficult, but you need to have to think big, think revolutionary, think digital, but start small. More than happy to talk more. I mean, there are papers, methodologies, tools that help you realize that.
So to that point, how does that work for problems that are like Swiss watches, where if you solve one component of it, if there's any part that you leave out, it no longer works. The parts all have to work together. What do you do for those specific ones?
Well, there is a little scary word. It's called governance. You need to have governance. So part of the charter of this organization, this competency center of excellence, is governance. I have not seen an organization succeed in their transformation journey without a center of excellence. I don't know how that's done. It cannot be done. So you need to have governance. But the danger in that is that governance could become heavy, right? When you empower government, we see what happens, right? So that's important. You had a question?
Hi, yeah. I wanted to go back to the organizational behavior, kind of picking up what she was saying. I was curious if there is one thing you could suggest we do, or a tool we could use as future business leaders, but also as students or involved in organizations on campus. So yeah, one thing we can do, or one tool we can use to empower organizations to better use technology and move forward in the future.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, from my perspective, and I think Parag also has probably a lot to say on this, continuously learn and always have a possibility, an avenue where you can innovate and try things out. I don't know what is the model there. Some companies say 20% of your time, is yours. Go and innovate. Always have it. We are in this new digital era. I constantly learn. I take courses all the time, right? I've written many books. I've done many things. But if I don't learn continuously, I will stagnate. So that's extremely important. And also your job situation should allow you to innovate, should encourage you to innovate. So as students, etc., encourage it within yourself as well as the organizations you belong to.
Yeah, good answer. I mean, it's a complex problem. It's not easy, but I do believe in the power of youth, because youth come up with a lot of change and a lot of ideas that, as you grow older, you get preconditioned to doing things in a certain way. And so always having exchanges with the people who can drive, and it's not necessarily only the youth, but definitely the youth have a lot more energy and change that they can bring about. Constantly trying things, making sure, like he says, innovation is a necessity of not getting bored. So just constantly trying things laterally. You don't have to be focused on just your domain. You can go into other domains, and pretty soon you will find. And if this behavior is encouraged by the institution of everybody, it just becomes a nicer place to go.
Related to continuous learning, for those of us who aren't super well versed in different technologies, what sort of resources would you recommend for us to keep up with those?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
For like continuous learning, especially for people like business students who may not be well versed in different technologies, like blockchain, for example, what sort of resources would you recommend that we look at to like learn more about those technologies?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest trends I've seen is online learning. Definitely, there are enormous amount of resources in online learning. And I think I encourage you, and I think Parag touched upon this, try to do almost like a sabbatical every now and then. I mean, immerse yourself in a completely different group or different environment for a few months and do a project which is not your area of comfort. I think that there is a lot of value in that. I am a strong believer in organizations that move people around in different groups. You can help yourself move around and find opportunities. So I would say these two, online learning and as well as expand your experiences with different groups.
No, I don't think there's any dearth of resources these days. There's lots and lots of. What's hard is figuring out your way around them. Right? You can spend 100 hours trying to study blockchain, and you could have done it in 2 hours if you talk to an expert and he said, go and look at these 2 things. Yeah. That's a good point. So, one thing I can tell you for people who are still in school is the earlier you seek out mentors for different things, the better this is going to be. And also in terms of work ethics and work, I've seen this thing change for me personally. When I was younger, I had any time was good. I had the capacity and the energy to learn. But as you grow older and you get busy with your professional life, your family life, and so on, there are certain times of the day, and this is different for different people, where you get really, really creative, really, really, you can do 5 times the amount of work in just in 1 hour. Those times, if you can figure out what that pattern is for you, make sure you take that time and you guard it as your own, and no one disturbs you in that time. I think it makes you more productive. Yes.
It was nice to learn about the digital twin of ourselves, in distant future. But I'm curious to know, like, what is the near-term, use cases of AI and machine learning in like entertainment business, and probably in other sectors. We could give some specific use cases that are going to happen in the near future, probably for which we can prepare ourselves. Like kind of just get ready and kind of gather those skills in those industries.
So, I'll start on this one. Since building digital twins or digital people is very close to my heart and my work, psychologically, we know for sure that people enjoy getting instructions or getting information from another person, from another face. And the facial interaction is very key to having those direct and also sublime exchanges, because there's certain things that you don't pick up in text in books, but you can pick them out when you're talking to a face. Like we're just ingrained with it. So when it comes to things like training, you're having a digital double or a digital master train you or teach you, or even in medical practice, like a doctor, if you have instead of having a text-to-speech application that's going to give you your symptoms, if you had a empathetic-looking doctor face out there telling you the same things, you would probably take that more seriously. So in the near term, this is happening. This is going to happen. Yeah. How close to a real face it gets in terms of that's going to be maybe something that will take some time, but this is happening. I mean, if you went to the conference last month, CES, one of those big projects out there was Project Neon from Samsung, which was basically picking up the digital market. It didn't work that well, according to my personal opinion, but still, it's like, you have to see that there is a wave among different people, not just entertainment, but also now consumer-centric. There's a wave among lots of different, there's a confluence happening where this kinds of technologies are being created and deployed, not deployed, but like potentially deployed. And when you see a wave like this happening, coming about in the industry, it's good to stand on the other side to know what's coming.
Yeah, that was a great point. If I were to add, one of the things we need to remember with digitization, especially like technologies, IoT and blockchain, but also I would like to add digital process automation, automating the value stream. When you're dealing with devices like remote devices, whether they're turbo engines or connected cars or whatever, and you're trying to maintain them, digital twin is not just a three-dimensional representation of that device, right? Or the human or the doctor, etc. You have now the possibility of knowing what happened with that device. Like with blockchain, you can know who owned the car and what are the changes you did, what are the fixes that did. So the digital twin could be very rich, very powerful, and applying AI, you can do data mining and say, okay, we've seen these types of trends when we replace this part, etc., or this type of environments where this device was used, it didn't work in other, so you can learn a lot in the maintenance, and then your maintenance processes can be leveraged to have the optimal operation of that connected device. So this is happening. There are many pragmatic applications of the digital twins, but I want to clarify, the digital twin does not mean just the holographic or three-dimensional representation. It could be much more than that, because you can keep trace, you have a traceability of everything that happened with that connected device.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
In terms of IoT, which you mentioned so many times, and connectivity, I think I think about that a lot and seeing all the technologies coming out, and I get the impression that we are doing it the wrong way, because not all of it, but normally the trend is I want to take a particular application or a particular setup and bring it as a UI on my phone so that I can control it, whereas you want more intelligence in the system. I don't want to take a panel of my AC on my phone so I can turn it on. And this is not IoT, Internet of. I want the system to figure out that, oh, Parag is in his car, he's driving home, he's exiting the 5 freeway right now, he should be home in 10 minutes, so let me put on the heater right now. And this should happen automatically, rather than having a more GUI-centric, taking instead of taking the device to the user via a UI, the device should have the intelligence of knowing. What are your feelings about it?
Oh, you're spot on. So first of all, let me clarify. I don't want to take too much time, but this happens to be one of the areas I focus on. In fact, next week I'm going to a very warm place called Calgary, Canada, speaking at an IoT conference in oil and gas. So IoT, it's a huge umbrella. There are at least there are multiple, but two major categories of IoT. One is called consumer IoT, and we're seeing an explosion, for example, in connected homes and connected cars, etc. The other part, which is less known, but in a sense more successful, is industrial IoT. And what you are mentioning, one of the trends, especially in industrial IoT. So think about oil rigs, right? Some of the machinery is in the ocean, in the bottom of the ocean. I mean, there are all kinds of technologies that are connected, or satellites, or very large devices in manufacturing industry for. One of the biggest trends in IoT is what is called edge computing. There's a term for it. And edge computing is pushing the intelligence on the edges, so that a lot of the data is massaged or reacted upon at the edges within the device. This is a no-brainer. And in fact, when you talk about connected devices, it's not the device is connected and I'm gathering data in my data center. There are multiple tiers. From first you have the sensors, temperature, motion, etc., pressure sensors, pollution sensors. Then you typically have a gateway. Then you have edge devices and edge computing. Then you have fog computing. Then it goes to the cloud. So there are multiple, it's very complicated, especially in an industrial Internet of Things. But edge computing is definitely the hottest trend in IoT.
I think we have time for one more question.
I just wanted to follow up on something you just mentioned, fog computing. And I was just wondering if you could explain, how do you conceptualize the difference between what's done on the edge, what's done in the fog, and what's done in the cloud?
Yeah, it's not an easy question, is it? And sometimes edge computing, it's fog computing, they get, it's really another tier. So if you think about the cloud, right, where you have like Amazon or Azure or these kind of platforms in the cloud, there are technologies that do some of the aggregation and massaging before it reaches to the cloud. Some of it are very close to the engine, and in a fog computing case, you might have several of those. Like you can have, let's say you have a fog computing environment, and you might have several wells in an oil field, connecting to the fog, and then fog does additional computation and caching and massaging, and then pushes some of the data to the cloud. So it's a multi-tier organization.
All right, cool. Well, I think that wraps things up. If we could all just give our speakers have a few small gifts for you as well, just as a token of our thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So